Well, it has been such a gift to be with you all these last couple of days. Over lunch, some of us were reflecting on how when I was talking about the possibility of coming to Steinbeck at that point, I think Lara mentioned, or Rob, that the maximum that could come together given the restrictions was 25, but I was okay with that. Rob said, present something that you've never taught on before, ideally from a forthcoming book, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to be involved in conversations. And I've been reminded of how truly fine and amazing the people of Manitoba are. So thank you for blessing me and ennobling my life through your personhood and presence. And I want to thank all the organizers, folks like Lara, Rob, Terry, Arlene, and your committee, and Dave for stepping in at the last minute for, you stayed healthy and you're the next man up, and folks like Dean and Roland on tech and your colleagues. So thank you for gifting me with this time. I think Steinbeck Bible College is doing amazing work, and it's a testament that you were able to pull this off. I mentioned last night that for 2 years, I have been lined up to do some things, not a ton of things during COVID, but every time it's been canceled or postponed or gone online. And so this is the first time I've done something live and in person. So thank you for your leadership and for your daring and creativity. Have any of you seen the movie Shawshank Redemption by chance? Okay, so quite a number of you. So it was not a blockbuster movie when it came out, but it had kind of a long tail, so to speak, and it's a great film. In the movie, Andy Dufresne, as you know, a lot of you have watched it, played by Tim Robbins, the actor, is falsely accused of murder, and so he ends up spending 20 years in prison. He's an accountant, and he does, the warden some kind of favor by doing his tax return and the tax return of some of the prison guards. And so he gets a break and ends up being assigned, as you may recall, to the prison library, which is a kind of a cush assignment as far as the penitentiary is concerned. And while he's working in the prison library, he receives a donation of vinyl records, which includes Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro. And in an act of defiance, Andy Dufresne plays Mozart's Marriage of Figaro over the loudspeakers of the prison. You will remember this scene if you saw the movie. And it creates a sense of euphoria in the entire penitentiary. And a fellow inmate, Red, played by Morgan Freeman, provides a voice-over narration for the scene. Sorry, I can't read it quite like Morgan Freeman, but I'll have to do. He sounds like God, right? So, so Morgan Freeman says in the voice-over narration as an inmate, "I have no idea to this day what those two Italian ladies were singing about. Truth is, I don't want to know. Some things are best left unsaid. I'd like to think they were singing about something so beautiful it can't be expressed in words and makes your heart ache because of it. I tell you, those voices soared higher and farther than anybody in a gray place dares to dream. It was like some beautiful bird flapped into our drab little cage and made those walls dissolve away. And for the briefest of moments, every last man in Shawshank felt free." Beauty can dissolve the walls that imprison us, including the walls of our shame, so that we can become our glorious, true self and find real freedom. Shame involves self-analysis, critique, and condemnation, which are primarily activities that occur in the left hemisphere of our brain. When we are exposed to beauty, that activates the right hemisphere of our brain, which leaves shame fewer resources with which to work. A study was done at Stanford University to study the different activities that affect the brain. And the researchers there sent participants on a 90-minute walk. Some were asked to hike the Dish, a scenic trail near the foothills of the campus, while the other half of the group was asked to walk one of the busiest streets in Silicon Valley. Before they were sent out on the walk, neuroscientists put the participants in an fMRI machine to capture their brain's resting activity. And they had them answer questions about their state of mind, including questions like how often they thought about and agreed with statements like, "My attention is focused on aspects of myself I wish I'd stopped thinking about." After the participants went on the scenic hike, but this was not true of people who were walking the busy road, their brain scans showed that there was less activity in the part of their brain that was linked to self-criticism, sadness, and depression, and they also reported feeling less anxiety and negative self-focused thinking. Shame, as we've seen, causes us figuratively and literally to curl in on ourselves. But there's something about beauty that draws us out of that curled in, self-absorbed posture. And as Simone Weil, the French mystic, writes, beauty requires us to give up our imaginary position at the center. Beauty requires us to give up our imaginary position at the center. So when you, and maybe you sort of have to use your imagination here because it's still pretty cold here in Steinbach, but when you look up and you see the sunlight and the rays of the sun streaming through a leafy branch on a field or in a forest somewhere, or see sunlight glistening orange gold on the water, or when you smell the scent of a cedar tree, or you see the flutter of a hummingbird's wings. We've got a hummingbird feeder in our backyard. Or you see a squirrel with its tail curled as it nibbles a nut. There's something about being exposed to that kind of beauty that draws us out of ourselves as we become attuned to the grace of God, the beauty of God woven into the world. I know a woman whose husband has an advanced stage of cancer. And though she is deeply sad, angry at God, and afraid, each morning in Vancouver, she walks through her neighborhood. She enjoys passing by the lovely homes in that space. And not long ago, she was walking past one of the homes in her neighborhood, and she noticed that there was a table in the front yard with an oregano flower bouquet on it, and with a little sign that says, "Please take this bouquet." And even though she had been crying and feeling sad and anxious and angry at God, she stopped and she picked up the bouquet, she smelled it, and she began to laugh with delight because the bouquet of oregano flowers was such a tangible sign of God's love for her. It just took her out of her pain and grief and self-absorption and evoked joy for her. Now, there is something about beauty that can free us from our self-absorption, our preoccupation, and enable us to attend more to the grace of God, to experience the joy that causes shame to get flushed out. Beauty also awakens us to the love of God. Have any of you been to the Sunshine Coast of BC by chance? So a few of you, several of you. A number of years ago, I was on the Sunshine Coast for a retreat with a group of folks that I'd walked with for a long time. And it was a clear starlit summer night, and my friend Elizabeth, who I mentioned earlier, and I were out on a canoe, and so we were just in awe of the star-studded sky. And every time we lowered our paddle into the water, it was like these tiny fireworks were exploding because of the phosphorescence. Yeah. And so we were just in this state of wonder with the stars above us illuminating the night and the sparkling phosphorescence below. It's just, my friend Elizabeth is pretty exuberant. So this is the greatest experience of my life. Yeah, it probably wasn't, but it felt like that in the moment. Have you ever experienced a moment in the face of beauty or goodness where you felt just an explosion of wonder in your heart? Maybe it was under a celestial star-studded sky. Maybe it was while listening to deeply moving music at a concert. Maybe it's been like years since you've been to an actual concert. Maybe it was as you enjoyed a sumptuous meal or savored the company of a loved one or something. If you can just for a moment imagine that sense of wonder and refeel at least a part of it if you can. You get a small glimpse into how God feels about you, because God feels wonder and awe over you. And there's something about beholding and being beheld by the beauty of creation that gives us a glimpse of the countenance of our Creator as He beholds us. Simone Weil, the French mystic, wrote that the beauty of the world is the tender smile of Christ to us through matter. The beauty of the world is the tender smile of Christ to us through matter. And God's heart delights over us so much, and if you need proof, about 2 millennia ago, He becomes a human being. He becomes one of us to be with us forever. He dies on the cross for our sins so that any sin and shame that might impede us from a connection, might block intimacy, is removed. In a famous verse in Romans 5:8 that I'm sure you know and many of you memorized, God demonstrates His own love for us in this, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And when we meditate on beauty, we become more beautiful ourselves. Many of you have preached probably on the themes of idolatry. In Psalm 115, verses 4 to 8, we read that if we worship idols, let's use modern idols such as putting money, possessions, or success at the core of our existence, we begin to look like those idols. We become as deaf and dumb and lifeless as those idols that we worship. If we lose our capacity to hear and speak the truth, we insulate ourselves from the Creator, who is the source of all true joy and life. But if we worship the living God, conversely, we will become like God, alive and free. Now, here's something noteworthy. As I suggested yesterday and earlier today, neuroscience research confirms that we become like the objects that we pay primary attention to. And so this may not be the case for most people of Mennonite upbringing and heritage. But if we meditate on a God whom we imagine, God in quotation marks, who is racist, judgmental, and misogynist, neuroscience shows, studies have been done, that will generate the part of our brain that creates feelings of fear and anger. And so if we meditate on a God that we imagine as being angry and judgmental, we will grow angrier and more judgmental. as we've seen in our time together, where attention goes, neural firing flows and neural connections grow. So theology really does matter. Places like Steinbeck Bible College really do matter. Sadly, according to a Baylor University study, and this is of Americans, but Canadians might have similar numbers, nearly 50% of Americans viewed God as critical and harsh, and only 23% viewed God as loving and benevolent. It's no wonder that Christians are often viewed as angry and judgmental and as generators of shame. But if we meditate on a God who is loving, joyous, and beautiful, as Scripture confirms, and as we see most clearly in the person of Jesus Christ, we will become more loving, beautiful, and joyous. We will grow alive and free. And long before we had neuroscience to understand this dynamic in a different way, the Apostle Paul intuitively understood this. And so he wrote, "We all with unveiled faces, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another." And King David, some of us were mentioning King David at lunch, also poetically described this dynamic and desire to be transformed by gazing on the beauty of the Lord. In Psalm 27, he wrote, "One thing I ask of the Lord, this only will I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek him in his temple." Now, although David committed some choices that were not very beautiful, far from perfect, that were very self-centered and destructive, namely adultery and murder, as he came into the presence of God, not only was he forgiven and redeemed, but his original glory was restored to him. As David came into the glorious presence of God, fully aware that he was a sinner, he did not feel condemnation, but rather, as he describes in Psalm 34:4, "Those who look to the Lord are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame." Those who look to the Lord are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. And when we look to the Lord and grow beautiful and free of shame, not only do we become more beautiful, but we desire to bring beauty into our world, beauty and justice. Dr. Elaine Scarry, a professor of literature at Harvard, writes, "The beholder of beauty seeks to bring new beauty into the world." And this desire to bring beauty into the world was surely part of what inspired Vedran Smilovic, the lead cellist of the opera in Sarajevo, to put on his blacktails on, what was the date? Let me double check here. May 28th, 1992, and sit down in a bomb crater and to play Albioni's Adagio in G minor. As you may know, this bomb crater was outside of a bakery where the day before, 22 people had been killed as they were standing in the bakery line. And so for the next 22 days, in honor of each of the 22 victims, Smilovic, amidst the rubble of war, in the crossfire of snipers and artillery gunfire, used something to challenge the destruction of war. He employed the only weapon he had, beauty. Beauty. When we experience beauty ourselves, we want to bring more beauty into the world. And this desire may not always be a conscious one. Public health data confirms that when we are exposed to natural beauty and the awe in that setting, that energizes us to share our resources more generously with others. So, for example, research done at the University of California at Berkeley asked people about how frequently they experienced awe, and then they ran them through tests that measures a person's generosity. And the research showed, even when accounting for other positive emotions like love and compassion, that the more a person experiences awe, the more generous they are. In another related experiment at the UC Berkeley campus, one group of participants was invited to stare up at these towering, magnificent eucalyptus trees for 1 minute. And then another group in that same vicinity was simply asked to stare at the side of a building for a minute. And then a research participant, sort of incognito, walked by and, quote, accidentally dropped pens, a bunch of pens. And the people who were looking up at the eucalyptus trees consistently picked up more pens. They became more generous. So there was a connection between exposure to beauty and giving. So if you want people to be generous, show beautiful pictures. I don't know. It wasn't meant to manipulate people, but just a thought. But there's something about being in the beauty of nature that inspires us to want to give. In a world of ideas, Bill Moyers records the memory of a reporter named Jacob Needleman who observed the launch of Apollo 17 back in 1975. Jacob Needleman remembers that it was a night launch, and there were hundreds of cynical reporters sitting out on a lawn, drinking lots of beer, making wisecracks and cynical remarks. And then they heard the countdown, 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then it was at night, and they saw this incredibly brilliant flash of orange light that illuminated the whole night sky. And then there was this whoosh, this sound that took a few seconds to get to them. I don't understand how that works, but the sound seemed to go right through them. And then this rocket, 35 stories high, the equivalent of a 35-story building, begins to slowly rise. And Needleman says you can practically hear draws dropping as everyone is in awe. The rocket continues to rise. There's a blue flame that's coming out of the bottom, and then the rocket seems to be just a star in the sky, and everyone realizes there are human beings on it. And then Needleman says people quietly get up from the lawn, and they're kind to each other. They open doors for each other. They speak to each other quietly and interestedly. And he says, the awe made people moral. He writes, they look at one another, speaking quietly and interestedly. They're kind. These were suddenly moral people because the sense of wonder, the experience of wonder, had made them moral. Many of us may think or assume that, beauty, the pursuit or the enjoyment of beauty is really the domain of the wealthy or people who have a lot of time on their hands. But is that really so? I would argue that beauty is not a luxury for the wealthy or the retired or those who've got a lot of time on their hands, but it is a necessity for the health of our souls because it can free us from our self-absorption and our self-preoccupation and our shame. And as the journalists who witnessed the launch of Apollo 17 experienced, beauty has a way of drawing us out of ourselves so that we treat one another with more respect, kindness, and love. And in our current climate, where there is so much othering of people who are different from us, including people who have different views around masks and vaccines and other, political issues, we desperately need to experience the kindness and the compassion and the empathy that beauty can inspire in and through us. Good news, according to the data, you don't need to watch the launch of a rocket or to stand on the precipice of the Grand Canyon to experience the kind of awe that is transformative. Abraham Goldberg, a professor at the University of South Carolina, conducted a statistical analysis of happiness in 5 cities: Toronto, New York City, London, Paris, and Berlin. And what they discovered was that happiness was not coming for people in these cities primarily from the usual markers we think will create happiness for people, such as wealth or success or capacity to network. Instead, the researchers discovered that in these cities, happiness was most easily attained by people as they experienced beauty in their cities every day, as they walk through parks and green spaces, and as they walk down cobblestone roads, or as they put themselves before beautiful buildings and architecture or history. And they discovered that the cumulative effects of this beauty was subtle but strong and had a profound effect on people's happiness. I wonder if you, and most of you are from the good province of Manitoba, and if you're online, you could be from anywhere, obviously, but would it be possible for you to put yourself in the pathway of beauty every day as a kind of spiritual practice? You know, before I check my phone and my messages, I will go on a little run with our golden retriever, Sasha, through a local park. It's still dark out, but there's something about being outside that lifts my spirits. I know it's very cold here, but some of you have been telling me, even if it's like minus 25 Celsius and it feels like minus, 40, 38 with the wind chill factor, as long as you bundle up, right? You can go outside, right? Or some of you shaking your head, some of you are like agnostic about that, so I guess that's a split. There's a split opinion. We'll take a poll a little bit later, on that. But is there a way that you could put yourself in the path of oncoming beauty every day? I think that Jacob, you walk on a trail not far from your church, and sometimes you skate the Red River? Could you do that? If not in an outdoor space, or here's one. Do you have a plant inside your home whose beauty and life you could savor? Or if you're indoors, it might be exposing yourself to beauty through an inspiring film, like maybe Shawshank, or a great novel, or before a work of art, a painting, or learning to paint or draw. But could you put yourself in the pathway of beauty to take you out of yourself, to free you from the inner critic, the self-condemnation that we sometimes fall into, and to liberate us from our shame? And as you experience beauty in the world, in your world, I pray that you would awaken in fresh ways to God's delight in you as you experience the tender smile of Christ coming to you through matter. And as you are exposed to the beauty of God in all the world, may you become and bring forth the beauty you long to see in the world. Let's take a moment to pray, and then let's open it up to one final, for this time at least, conversation. At the end of each of the chapters, as I mentioned, I will introduce prayer exercises. So again, close your eyes, take several deep breaths, inhaling Deeply through your nose and exhaling slowly. Inhale deeply, exhale slowly. Remind yourself that you are surrounded and beheld by love, in love. Continue to breathe in deeply, exhale slowly, center yourself. Become conscious of your Maker. And then, as I alluded to earlier, can you remember a time where you were in the presence of great beauty? Perhaps you looked up at the night sky and beheld celestial beauty, or you were listening to beautiful music or viewing gorgeous art, eating a sumptuous meal in the company of your beloved, and you just experienced an explosion in your heart of wonder and awe. If you can just imagine that moment again, that special moment in your life, do so and just hold it. Wonder, awe, beauty, deep gratitude. Revel in that beauty. Hold that feeling, if you can, in your heart for a moment. And remember that is how God sees you. He looks at you with wonder, delight, and awe. He is smiling on you. He loves you. Exalts in you. May it be so for you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.